And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Steel Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of SteelCurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is Steel Curtain contributor Shayne Kubas. Shayne, I'm dealing with a little bit of a cold today, so if I don't sound like my usual self, that is why. We're going to power through anyway because we have too much to talk about today. We're going to break down every possible Steelers quarterback option to start for this team in 2025. We're also going to talk about the biggest roster cuts Pittsburgh could make this offseason. But let's start with some of the news around the NFL and surrounding the Steelers today. We'll start with the NFL divisional round results, Shayne. So last week there were 8 teams in the hunt still for a Super Bowl championship. Now there are just 4: the Chiefs, Bills, Commanders, and Eagles. This past weekend, the game that probably everybody was most upset about is the Chiefs winning again. Patrick Mahomes getting calls. Again, it's not something we're not used to seeing, but Chiefs beat the Texans 23-14.
Yeah, and you watching that game, it was pretty apparent that the Chiefs were going to kind of just dink and dunk their way and make plays whenever they had to. Like, this Chiefs team is weird because I'm fully prepared for them to play in and probably win another Super Bowl, but they firmly reached that Patriots territory of they're just going to suffocate you on defense. Mahomes is going to be the best quarterback in the league in the moments that matter. Kelsey's going to all of a sudden be able to get open and make plays just whenever he has to. They've become that version of a dynasty where it's they're not overpowering the way they were their first couple championships in the first 5-6 years of Mahomes' career. Now they've kind of settled into that. We're just going to find ways to be the smart team and the better team than you when it matters. And I'm hoping the Bills can upset them just because I want to see some different teams in the Super Bowl. I'd love to see a Bills Commander Super Bowl, for example. But I fear we may be on a collision course with a repeat of a couple years ago. So,
yeah, Shayne, if I would have told you 3 years ago that the Chiefs would win a playoff game with Patrick Mahomes completing 16 of 25 passes for 177 yards, you'd be like, oh, no, that's not going to happen. So,
right? You don't think so?
They completely flipped script, and they only completed to one receiver. One wide receiver in this game. 5 guys that he passed to didn't even catch the football. And so it wasn't the best game offensively, of course, but they've done it both ways. The Chiefs have won with their defense. They've won when Mahomes has put them 50 touchdowns. And so they're capable of doing it. They've shown it. They've won 3 of the last 4. I think everybody is ready for that to end. And so I have a feeling I know how people are going to be rooting for the AFC Championship game this weekend, if I had to guess. The other games around the NFL, the big AFC game and the most anticipated game of the playoffs so far was Baltimore at Buffalo, a game that was a nail biter right down to the last second. The Ravens almost mounted that drive to send the game into overtime. Mark Andrews, of all people, drops the 2-point conversion. Game ends 27-25. Shayne, who are you rooting for in that one? I have a feeling I know.
I mean, the Bills I wanted to win clearly because, the Steelers bias here a little bit. But I did hope that it was going to be a little bit more of a game where both quarterbacks came out looking like the best players. And it didn't really happen. Josh Allen didn't really do much of anything in terms of as a passer. They kind of had a neutered game plan against the Ravens. I think they wanted to just make sure that they didn't make any mistakes. And meanwhile, Lamar made a couple mistakes, but mostly was brilliant in my opinion. I think he outside of the interception, which was definitely kind of one of those things where he expected, I think, Bateman to do something different, and he also was getting pressured when he get the ball out. I'm not sure how much of that I can really say is a huge mistake by him. Didn't give up any points on that. And then the fumble, yes, he should have gone down. He should have ate that sack, but he did have to catch a bad snap, all that stuff. So I think people are kind of piling in on him a little bit more than they should. But that last drive, he was just decimating the Bills. And you got to feel for Mark Andrews a little bit. But unfortunately, and I said this to some friends of mine during the game, he might be the least clutch great player I've ever seen. He just, in these moments, it feels like he shrinks more than he rises to the occasion. And it's unfortunate for him because he had a chance to make up for the fumble he had earlier in the game and just couldn't catch the pass. So,
yeah, it was brutal. If you were a Ravens fan for that one, even being -3 in the turnover department, Shayne, the Ravens still almost found a way to win. And I think they were clearly the better team. I mean, had they had one fewer turnover, I think the game goes the other way. But the Bills are one of the last 2 teams in it. We're going to talk about our predictions to close off the show today. Let's kick it over to the NFC divisional round games. And the Rams almost made it a game against the Eagles. I mean, they were in that thing.
they should have won, in my opinion. I really think that they played a good enough game outside of Barkley having his long runs again, which admittedly I did pick the Rams to win because I felt like Barkley wouldn't have quite as big of a day as he did. Obviously, early in the season when he broke his own record and had one of the biggest games any running backs had in the NFL. But of course, he went and did it again. Like this offense with him, like I understand that the passing game is a little bit watered down right now. I know that Hurts is banged up in multiple ways, but at the end of the day, like I don't know if any team can stop this running game. I just don't know if they can. Is if Barkley has a crease, and this offensive line makes creases bigger than any other offensive line in the league, he just is too good when there's open space. Like this is maybe the best space player in the sport right now. So to me, it feels like the Eagles are pretty much the only thing they can really do is beat themselves, and they did that a little bit in that game. But the Rams ultimately just couldn't get it done in bad weather, especially with the passing game kind of being messed up from that.
Yeah, it's so deflating to Sean McVay and the Rams. The fact that you held Jalen Hurts to 128 passing yards, you sacked him 7 times, and yet the Eagles still won that game because of the rushing. 205 for Saquon, 70 for Hurts, and so they just couldn't keep him from doing their thing on the ground. Yeah. Stafford had 324 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, but ultimately fell short in that game. And then the biggest surprise of the weekend, Shayne, was the Commanders upsetting the Detroit Lions. I think a lot of people, they're ready to see the Lions do it. I mean, they've been this good team. They're a fun team to watch, fun team to root for. Haven't won a championship or a Super Bowl in 100 years. And so I was kind of pulling for them to be that team. And the Commanders are the underdog team. And so that makes for a good story as well. But to go and score 45 points on the road, it just shows you the value that a quarterback offers in this league. And it was basically Jaden Daniels versus the Lions roster in the quarterback one out.
Yeah, I think the story of this game, a lot of people tried to find, blame for everybody. I think ultimately Detroit ran into a problem of their roster was really decimated with injuries this year, and they ran into the buzzsaw that is Jaden Daniels right now. This guy is playing at a level that just isn't normal for rookies. I know CJ Stroud had a phenomenal year last year, but I think Daniel's season is honestly even more impressive, especially considering the playoff success so far, because nothing bothers this guy. Like you could just tell that like when the lights are brightest, that's when he plays his best. And as a rookie, that just isn't how that usually works. That's usually when they shrink the most because they're just not used to it at the NFL level. It's different on the NFL stage, right? For him, it hasn't been. And I think as long as he can continue to play within himself and not do too much and just let the offense flow, which with Cliff Kingsbury has been fantastic outside of kind of a mid-season stretch where they kind of fell off a little bit. But he's found his groove again. That offense has found his groove. And as long as the defense can just play complementary football, which you could argue they, outside of the turnovers, they kind of didn't. Like they kind of got lucky that Goff was just throwing them the football. As long as they can get some turnovers and make some splash plays, I think that they can at least make it a game against the Eagles.
Yeah, I think everybody is going to be rooting for the Commanders in that one, unless you are an Eagles fan.
Right. Yeah.
I was a huge Jaden Daniels fan. I love this past year's quarterback class. I wish the Steelers had interest. I wish there was some way they could get up there, but seeing how early and how high all these quarterbacks went, Penix and Nix included, like there was just no chance the Steelers were ever going to get up that high to land one. We're going to talk about the quarterback situation for Pittsburgh here in just a minute. That's our big topic for today. Let's kick things back over to Steelers news, though, Shayne. Mel Kiper Jr. released his first mock draft of the offseason here, and he has the Steelers taking Ohio State wide receiver Emeka Egbuka. The more I watch this guy, the more I think that this is just a really solid pick. Like the Steelers have been going kind of the other direction with receivers, taking the more polarizing players like George Pickens, like Chase Claypool. Egbuka has such a high floor that I'm just confident he's going to be a really good player in the mold of a JSN, maybe somewhere between a JSN. You get him in the right system, maybe a St. Brown Light, maybe type of player, but just a really good football player. How would you feel, Shayne, if that was Pittsburgh's selection at pick 21?
It's funny that that's the first pick that he made for the Steelers because I just recently finished watching 21 wide receivers for the draft, and he ranked 4th for me in the class.
Okay.
And I think that's about as high as most people will have him just because of the mostly the slot role that he's probably going to play in the NFL. But he, to me, the St. Brown comp is definitely the high end comp for him. I think that's kind
Yeah,
of
for
what
sure.
my view of him is like that's the type of player he could potentially be. Because again, there's really nothing he doesn't do well. Like he's not going to
Mhm.
separate down the field because he's a slot player primarily, but outside of that, I mean, there's really not much that he can't do. I think he can play outside a little bit. He has some versatility to do that. I don't think he has to be in the slot like 85% of the time or higher just to survive. I think you could throw him out as a Z sometimes and do different things with him. You can hand him the football. I know he fumbled in the championship game, but like you saw
Yeah.
how effective he was doing that this year at times. So there's a lot of things you could do with him. But I think the only problem with it is two things, right? Is one, the Steelers don't draft receivers in the first round. Now Khan might break that mold eventually. Hasn't yet, but could do it. And also, I think he's kind of to the point where you said that we draft polarizing receivers. I think he's too normal. I think that the Steelers won't draft him because he isn't insane. So I mean, that's until they prove to me that they can draft a receiver that isn't out of his mind. I kind of wonder if they won't. But in all honesty, though, like that would be a really solid pick. And I think that
Mhm.
if I had to guess, though, right now, I really think it's gonna be a defensive player. I think it's gonna end up being
Mhm.
an interior defensive lineman or a corner. And I understand both of those for sure in a class that I haven't gotten to the defenders yet. I'm going to be doing that here soon, but it appears to be a really strong class for both of those positions. But you need weaponry, and unless they're going to get after it in free agency, which we'll talk about on the show eventually, we'll be talking about free agent options. But I do think that would be a good pick, though.
Yeah, and Shayne, the way that this draft may line up, and it's obviously we're really early in this process, but if the top receivers are wiped off the board, they may be forced to go defense regardless, maybe an
Yeah,
interior defender, cornerback, because that's where the value is going to be.
I think so too.
Now,
Yeah,
with Egbuka, though, we talked about how every one of these receivers, going back to Antonio Brown now, has been missing a crucial element to their game. Like Pickens can't run routes. Deontay was wildly inconsistent with bad hands. Claypool, there's no shortage of problems that he had.
yeah,
Juju couldn't separate. So Egbuka really does check those boxes, though, of a guy who really is a well-rounded receiver that you can funnel an offense through. So I do think there's going to be a lot of interest there.
yeah.
Ohio State connection, 5-star recruit, most productive receiver in Ohio State history. Like there's so much he has going for him. I don't believe he will be there. I will say that right now. I actually think he's
wouldn't
going to
be
be gone
shocked.
before that.
I wouldn't be shocked. I
So
think to me right now, I think depending on ultimately how people view the outside receivers in this class, because full disclosure, this is probably kind of a hot take for a lot of people. Maybe eventually people get on it. I have Matthew Golden from Texas as my number one wide receiver right now.
wow,
That's
yeah.
who I'd be drafting first because I'm most confident about his ability to separate as an outside receiver at the NFL level immediately. Like it's kind of where ultimately it comes down to. And there's guys right behind him like McMillan and guys like that I have similar grades on ultimately, but I think that he'd be the guy that I would take first just because I value the separation ability. But ultimately, it matters how many receivers, like you said, are off the board by the pick. Like I could see Denver taking them taking him right in front of us. Like that's definitely an
Yeah.
option. Like teams like that. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think Denver's a team that you may have to jump ahead of. And again, you
potentially,
trade up
yeah.
for a wide receiver in a not spectacular wide receiver class. You mentioned Golden. He kind of gives me Jordan Addison vibes. I just think he's a good football player. So that's another player that I'm pretty high on as well. We'll obviously have lots of time to break down the draft. Film study has started over here for us, but we're going to do lots more of it in the coming weeks here. Shayne, let's talk about a rumor that popped up this morning from Andrew Filipponi of 93.7.
Of course.
The fan says, take it for what you will. The Steelers, he says, the Steelers, according to sources, are interested in Alabama quarterback Jalen Milroe. Shayne, I know that you've watched Milroe a lot. I know that this isn't really, he's not your typical NFL quarterback, but the NFL is moving towards more of a league where you can get away with having a dual threat. Lots to be desired in terms of a passer, lots to be desired in terms of production. What didn't have the best record being an Alabama quarterback, had 16 touchdowns, 11 picks, but was lethal on the ground. And I mean, you are getting you might be getting a Justin Fields plus level athlete with Milroe, and he's going to run sub 4.4 at 225 pounds. And so would this quarterback at all interest you in the Steelers trying to take a stab on him? Where do you think that he should go in the draft?
So he is my third quarterback because I did quarterback evaluations a while back. There's a couple guys I need to watch that are that I didn't get a chance to watch the first time around to see if there's anyone that will take over him at this point besides Ward and Sanders. But he's a day two player to me. I think he's a guy you take on early day two, mid day two as a developmental quarterback because he has all the skills that you need in terms of physical skills, especially to be a successful quarterback. He just isn't developed enough as a drop back passer, right? And no matter what offense you're running, like I think the only way he could play early is if you run essentially the 2020 Eagles offense that Hurts was running in 2021, whichever one that was, like his first kind of foray into the NFL as a starter. That type of offense where it's really like one read and take off. Like if your first read's not open, you're now the running back on the play, basically. That type of offense, I think he could have some success with early. Outside of that, though, he's a year or two away, I think, to me. Like the fact he came out, I understand, because I think that unless he transferred to a school like Oregon or something like that, that's been able to pump out, guys that wouldn't have been probably big time prospects, but maybe could be now at quarterback. I don't think he's really going to develop much more in Alabama, but I do think whatever team takes him has to go with the idea of like, you have to sit for you legitimately have to sit for a full year or more, which the Steelers might be the case because they probably are going to be bringing in a bridge anyway. So maybe you can do that, but I don't know about that rumor. I feel like if they want to go in that direction, like it makes sense based on if they're interested in bringing Fields back. Like if they want that type of dynamic athlete at quarterback, he certainly fits the bill.
Yeah, he would. And so I think that if you were to go that route, it'd be wise to bring Fields back as kind of to bridge that way, because you can go from one similar type quarterback to the next. Yeah. Now, Shayne, he would have to develop better as a passer than Fields. And I like Fields better as a prospect significantly coming out than I like Milroe. It kind of reminds me, I don't watch this show, but I see the meme everywhere about the boats in the Family Guy thing. It's you have, it could be anything, but it could also be Justin Fields.
Yeah,
so,
right.
And that's how it kind of feels to me. Although, like we're entering this territory, Shayne, where it's like every year you've got to get past Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson. Like the quarterback play in the AFC is so strong right now. Maybe the best route is to go a completely different direction and just say, we're not going to be the best passing team because we can't compete with those guys. But what we can do is we can be a lethal running team, and you're going to have a hard time defending us. Now, is Arthur Smith the right guy to lead that charge? I think you would be better off with a Shane Steichen type, someone who runs an RPO offense. If you truly want to go with a Justin Fields or a Jalen Milroe quarterback, but something to consider, at least worth noting, because it doesn't surprise me. Tomlin has hinted how important quarterback mobility was. He said that in his postseason presser. He said that's regarding Justin Fields. And so I would not be shocked if they ended up going that route. Keep an eye on that. Watch where the Steelers are on the scouting trail, who they bring in. But I would expect them to have interest in Jalen Milroe. Now you can say, it reminds us of the Kenny Pickett situation. It's like, we need a quarterback. We're just going to take whatever one falls to us. We'll talk about the quarterback situation more in a little bit here. And I do have some stats I want to share when we get to the end of that topic that are a little bit concerning. But let's table that for now. And we got some chats popping. If you guys are joining us in the live chat, please drop your questions for us. I saw, Aaron Glenn to the Jets as a new head coach. I think that's a pretty good hire. We'll see. They're going with another defensive mind over there. Didn't work out with Robert Saleh, so we'll see how that goes. Our Barley chimes in. I have no idea how Dart and Howard are behind Sanders, Miller, and Ewers. I can tell you why, in my opinion. Dart, first of all, is coming from that Lane Kiffin offense. I think quarterbacks just don't succeed for whatever reason there. I got burned by Matt Corral. I like Dart. I think he's accurate, young, good size, pretty good mobility. I just want to see a quarterback come out of there and actually be successful. Howard does not have a big NFL arm, in my opinion. Like, I think he checks a lot of other boxes: layering throws, size, championship
pedigree.
Quarterback, obviously, has that pedigree, has good stats, but that arm just isn't there for me. I watch him, I see like a more athletic, like Mason Rudolph, and that just isn't doing it for me.
Yeah, I do need to watch Howard because I didn't watch him my first time around.
I actually watched 3 games of him this morning, and I just that is the one holdup I have. I do think he could be a solid quarterback in the right situation, but just does not have a live NFL arm to drive it with velocity. Ewers just so sporadic in his accuracy, never really improved much. Like, he wasn't the quarterback we thought he'd be coming out of high school. I remember watching him at the McDonald's All-American game there. So, and then I just like Sanders and Milroe better. I think what they have to offer is higher end upside still than those guys. But I do get your argument there. I do think that there's a chance that Dart and Howard, if those are two guys that I'm taking a shot on outside of the first round, it probably is those two quarterbacks right there.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right. If you have more questions for us, please drop them in the chat here. We'll keep that conversation rolling. And Shayne, let's move on to our big discussion topic for today. A couple of big discussion topics, but the first is the quarterback situation for Pittsburgh in 2025. Nothing's more important than this. If you don't get the quarterback right, nothing's going to go right. Look at any of these teams across the league. Look at the teams that are remaining in the playoffs right now. Look at the ones who made it to the divisional round and the quarterbacks that we have in there. Let me pop this back up again. I've got these right at my fingertips here. So give me 1 second. So the quarterbacks in right now, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jayden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, the ones who were just recently eliminated, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud, Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff. All these quarterbacks, Shayne, with the exception of Hurts, was picked in the first round. It's kind of telling. When you average out the overall pick in which they were selected, even with Hurts throwing off the curve, they were taken 12th overall on average. If you exclude Hurts as the outlier, these quarterbacks were taken 7th overall in the draft. Now, we just heard Tomlin say last week in his presser that Lamar Jackson went late in the first round, Jalen Hurts went in the second round, basically like a slap in the face to the question to say, yeah, we don't need to trade up to get a quarterback, or we don't need a tank to get a quarterback. I beg to differ, because all the data is showing that you need to do that. Shayne, I want to share something real, even more incriminating than that right now. I've got all the quarterbacks that were drafted on day 2 over the past decade in the NFL. And I want to read you this list beginning in 2015 all the way to present day. In 2015, the day 2 quarterbacks, Garrett Grayson, Sean Mannion. 2016, Christian Hackenberg, Jacoby Brissett, Cody Kessler. 2017, Deshaun Kaiser, Davis Webb, CJ Beathard. 2018, Mason Rudolph. 2019, Drew Lock, Will Grier. 2020, Jalen Hurts. That's the one right there. I think he did land in a very good situation. I'm not taking anything away from him, but I think he landed in a great situation in a really talented roster. Go into 2021, Kyle Trask, Kellen Mond, Davis Mills were your day 2 quarterbacks. 2022, Desmond Ridder, Malik Willis, Matt Corral. 2023, Will Levis, Hendon Hooker. And there was none in this previous year's draft class. That's a really small hit rate. And legitimately, Jalen Hurts is the only hit that you can argue from that. Heck, Mason Rudolph might be the best day 2 quarterback of the rest of the group there, because everybody else was such an underperformer. And what it shows you, Shayne, is the data clearly says you can't wait until day 2 to draft a quarterback. Now, there's a different discussion. We can look at data that says you can wait until the 20s to draft one. But where did the Steelers get their quarterbacks? Bradshaw was number 1 overall. Roethlisberger was 11 overall.
And he shouldn't have been available that long either, which is a whole
shouldn't have been available that long. It just happened to be a historic quarterback class with those group of 3 there with Manning and Rivers. That all the data and history shows us you have to take quarterbacks early in the draft to get a franchise passer. Look at the quarterbacks that were remaining as of the divisional round. Jared Goff was the first pick in the draft. Matt Stafford, the first pick in the draft. CJ Stroud, the second pick in the draft. Lamar Jackson, 32nd pick. By the way, for what it's worth, I'm just going to pat myself on the back here. I went on record saying Lamar Jackson would have been my pick. I did not care. We had a 36-year-old Roethlisberger. I would have taken him. The talent was too good to pass on.
Same
and
there.
I think the Steelers would have had a franchise quarterback.
Yeah.
I also would have taken Jalen Hurts 2 years later in the second round over Chase Claypool. I went on record saying that as well. That was the one, second, 53rd overall for Hurts. That's the outlier. Jayden Daniels, 2nd overall pick. Mahomes, 10th overall pick. Josh Allen, 7th overall pick. You have to draft these guys high. And if Tomlin's not understanding that, shame on him for not seeing the evidence that is behind all of this.
I think ultimately, my takeaway from that is that it doesn't surprise me one. It's kind of something that I think we all kind of know, even if we don't know exactly the numbers on it. Although, like you said, you bringing up the specifics like makes it very clear. But I think the bigger problem is, again, it's not that you can't find a quarterback later in the draft than like early first round. It's that one, it's still usually in the first round. Two, you still have to assume that the players that are good enough at quarterback are going to go early enough that you have to be prepared to move up and make moves to get them. Because you even look at like with Mahomes getting picked 10th to the Chiefs, they had to come up and get him because they knew that he wasn't going to last till whenever they were picking. So they had to make that move. Even if he wasn't valued the way he should have been, he still was the 10th pick in the draft. Like at the end of the day, the point I think that we need to hit home here is that even though quarterback is a really high bust rate position because of how hard it is to play quarterback, even though most of the picks that are bad are in the first round, the picks that are good are also still in the first round. Like the guys who work out are still often picked high. It's just that quarterbacks don't work out that often. But when you are taking a swing at it, if you want it to be a realistic swing, numbers wise, it still has to come in those first 32 picks.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the data shows that. We've got plenty of evidence for that now. John chimes in here. Knowing a QB miss can include the lack of coaching development. Is it wise to bring in a new one under the current coaching staff and philosophy? That's the $1 million question there. And my response to that would be, I simply don't think there's evidence for streaming quarterbacks who are past their prime, which has been the Steelers' philosophy here, and it probably will continue the next year or so. I don't think that works in terms of bringing you Super Bowl success. And so I think to get back there, you're ultimately going to have to draft a quarterback. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Any more questions, please drop them in for us. All right, let's start with this, Shayne. The familiar faces that the Steelers could bring back this year. There's two of them, obviously, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. And we heard today that the Steelers and Russell Wilson may be in contract talks. Shayne, do you have that? Do you have that tweet or that quote?
Yeah, so on Pat McAfee's show, and there's multiple people have been tweeting about Nick Farabah was one of them that I saw. Basically, there's a couple comments from Russ, one of them being that they have started to have conversations, that he wants to finish his career in Pittsburgh. He'd like to retire there. And so that there is certainly smoke there, right? There's certainly conversations that they're having now. We don't know at this point how serious they are. We don't know how much they're interested in it, obviously. I'm sure Russ does want to finish his career here because he was given the opportunity to start despite the injury to start the year, and had a stretch of success for a while there. So we'll see kind of how much that actually transpires over the next few days, and then as we get closer to free agency after the Super Bowl and everything. But there's at least smoke there in terms of them potentially being interested in bringing him back still.
Yeah, and that quote from Wilson, this is via Nick Farabah's X account. Yes, we have started to talk a little bit. Obviously, we had our meetings and everything else. We're just getting into it. And Russell Wilson wanting to be there is obviously different than the Steelers running to sign him. Like they could be looking to go in a different direction. Now, obviously, there was talk midway through the season that was the plan, to get Wilson signed to an extension. But when you lose 5 straight games and average 14 points per game to close out the season, that can change things for sure, especially considering Wilson's going to be 37 years old next season. How much do you want to tie to him? Are you going to give guaranteed money beyond the first year, which I think would be a foolish decision to do? But we're going to have those conversations. Shayne, of Wilson or Fields, which one do you think is more likely to be Pittsburgh's quarterback in 2025?
I think if we're doing more likely here, I want to lean Fields, but I still kind of lean Wilson a little bit at this point in time, just because I think there's going to be more outside interest in Fields than there is Wilson, right? I think that's an underrated element of this, because it'd be easy to say like, oh, well, Fields didn't get to play as much as he maybe wanted to, so he didn't have as much tape to put out there. Maybe other teams aren't going to be interested in signing him to be a starter. This draft class and also the amount of open spots makes me think that someone might be willing to do that. They might be willing to to sign him as at least a bridge starter for a couple of years or something like that, similar to what the Steelers would be doing if they brought him back. So there's at least, I think, going to be competition there. Maybe Fields does want to come back despite being benched for Wilson, so maybe that doesn't matter. But I still think if we're playing the odds, I would probably lean Wilson slightly.
I would go the other way, Shayne. I would say Fields, and it's largely because of Tomlin's comments. I don't know if I might be reading too much into it, but it does sound like he's been killed by mobility.
Yes.
And I think that maybe that is the direction he's looking to go in at this point. He's just been stressing how valuable that is to have a quarterback with mobility. And so, and obviously we know Fields is over a decade younger than Wilson. So he's got that going for him as well. You could be right about the market. I'll be interesting to see what it looks like. According to Spot Rack and over the cap projections, looks like Wilson's going to get the bigger deal. But you can make a case just as easily for Fields. Had the 10 total touchdowns, 1 interception in the first 6 weeks of the season, and obviously offers a lot more as a rusher with a little bit of upside there. Although when it comes to upside anymore, Shayne, I'd say when you're in year 5, I mean, you're basically the player that you are. And that's kind of how I feel at this point. I know you're in a fairly new organization. You've only been here for a year, but I feel like when you're this far into your NFL career, the chances of you improving significantly go way down. Now you might take baby steps at this point, but normally that improvement comes in the first 2 or 3 years of a quarterback's career. It's not going to come in year 5. And so that would be my reserve with Fields. I still think it's good enough to get you to the playoffs. And maybe, like we said, Fields could be that guy that gives you that spark because of the legs, because of the downfield ability. Maybe it would be good enough to at least go on a mini playoff run there. So we'll see what they do. But I would lean Fields in terms of which one they bring back among the 2 familiar faces there. Now, if we move to free agent options, there are a few out there that are pretty underwhelming overall. And obviously the big one is going to be Sam Darnold, right? Like, depends on what the Vikings do with him. I have a feeling now, and this is such a roller coaster ride, because before the last few weeks of the season, it's like, yeah, the Vikings, there's no way the Vikings can let Darnold hit the market. I mean, 35 touchdown season, 14-3 record. I mean, 14-2 at the time. Then he had the collapse against the Lions in the season finale, and then the dud game in the playoffs and one and done. That can change a team's mind for sure. And if you see that happen, it's like, well, maybe it was a farce. Maybe it is time to run with JJ McCarthy. And so it's not out of the ordinary to be able to bring him back on like a 2-year deal, throw a lot of guaranteed money at him until McCarthy is obviously fully recovered from the knee and ready to jump in there. But if he is the option to hit the market, is that the best available option, Shayne, for this team?
I think if we're talking about pure free agents, he is the best pure free agent quarterback. One, because the class just isn't very good, and also because of what he showed with the Vikings this year, where he is one of those guys that I think has legitimately improved. Now, the offense made him as good as he was. Let's be very honest about that. Like, he's not the player. He's not going to be that player he was with the Vikings that he would be with the Steelers or anywhere else, in my opinion, at least. But he's developed enough where I think that he gives you more ability than anyone we have on the roster, than anyone you could draft outside of maybe the first 2 quarterbacks, depending on how you feel about them, even maybe not them. So he clearly would be the biggest potential upgrade that we could get in terms of, like, especially that still has a little bit of potential there, right? Now, I personally think he's either going back to the Vikings on a 1 or 2 year deal to give them time for McCarthy to get ready if they don't think he's ready to play, which we'll see about that, or a team like the Raiders or someone like that really desperately needs someone to come in and just be a decent quarterback and would be willing to pay him maybe more than the Vikings or other teams would be willing to pay him. That's where I think he's ultimately going to end up. I don't really think Pittsburgh is super on the radar for him at this point.
Yeah, that would be my guess too, is I don't think they'll be able to match whatever offer does go out there if he hits the open market. But the other options that the team will at least consider, Shayne, I don't know if you and I would consider them, but it's very likely Aaron Rodgers gets the axe this offseason, and Kirk Cousins as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about, we thought Russell Wilson was a washed up retread. You look at these guys in the seasons that they're coming off of, obviously both came off of the Achilles. And so maybe there's a chance that in their old age, they could be better than they were in 2024, but that's a pretty low bar. Both were not very good, pretty underwhelming. I mean, Cousins looked like his arm was completely shot, like trying to drive some of those balls to the sidelines. Like, yikes, man. And then Rodgers was just such a disappointing season this year. Do either of those options, first of all, do you think either of those players would be someone the Steelers would consider? We know how they like to bring in guys past their prime. Miles Jack, William Jackson, Patrick Peterson. Tomlin likes a guy. They're on the radar.
I would not be shocked if Rodgers was considering if he's going to keep playing, which I actually would guess right now that he quits. Personally, is my kind of lean right now.
Mm-hmm.
But if he were to keep playing and it's not for the Jets, I would not be shocked if there was mutual interest there. Unfortunately, um, I think Rodgers was an average quarterback this year overall, but I think that he's not going to be better than that moving forward, especially with this team. If he were to come here, I
Mm-hmm.
could not imagine him and George Pickens figuring stuff out. Let me put it that way. I do not think that that would mesh particularly well. So there's that. But then Cousins too. Like I just think he's done. Like unless the Achilles was really the whole reason it looked so bad, and he's going to be healthier next year. I don't think he's a starting quarterback at the level he's playing at right now. Like I just don't think he is. So those two I'd be out on. The one that, and this isn't a free agent option, but since we won't talk about specifically like trades and stuff like that, the guy that I'd be looking at if you want to have the right balance of like it won't be too expensive probably. You won't be looking at a situation where it's a long-term thing. It probably wouldn't be overly expensive to trade for as well if they're willing to move off of this guy. Geno Smith is who I'd be looking at the Seattle Seahawks if they're ready to do something different at quarterback, which I don't think they are because I don't think they have better options either, obviously, besides him. But if they were willing to make a deal with him, he'd be the guy that I'd be targeting because I think he'd be a great fit for the offense that we currently have as far as being able to attack the middle of the field. He did that at an excellent rate in 2024 and has done that for the last couple of years. And I think that his skill set would be better than anything we currently have. So the mobility element wouldn't be there as much, obviously, and I know that they want that type of thing, but he would probably be the guy that's an outside option that I'd be looking at the most.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people that could get behind that. You'd be able to run a competent offense at the very least. Is it good enough to get past what's the gauntlet of the AFC? Probably not, but you might be able to find more success with a quarterback like that if he becomes available. Some of the other names out there in terms of free agents, really underwhelming list. Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Jacoby Brissett, Marcus Mariota, Drew Lock, Jared Stidham, Andy Dalton. Like, no thanks. I mean, you could do a lot better than that. Unless the goal is to tank, then you can, by all means, draft one of those quarterbacks. I doubt it's Pittsburgh's goal. So I think the names that we previously mentioned, much more likely than that. The other option that I didn't have to hear in my notes, Shane, but we talk about trades. You mentioned trades. A few guys out there that, now again, this is not what the Steelers would do for this one, but what I would be somewhat interested in, and go ahead and chime in the chat if you think that I'm insane for saying this.
Okay.
I'm okay if the Steelers want to take a flyer on an Anthony Richardson, a Will Levis. Here's my thought process with this. If they're good on a new team in a new situation, maybe you found a franchise quarterback. The tools are all there. I mean, 100th percentile tools. Like they got everything that you want. If they're bad, well, then there's the bad season you probably needed, quite honestly, to go get the quarterback that you need to get. And so that's kind of my thought process. We're stuck on this plateau for so long, and unless the Steelers are willing to trade up multiple first-round picks to go get that guy, I don't see it getting much better. John, a little bit ago, John chimed in here and said Bush was number 10. I think he's talking about Devin Bush was the 10th overall pick.
Right.
Yes, in that draft, and this is what's so bizarre, is that the Steelers would be willing to trade up for a 5'11" off-ball linebacker.
Yeah.
But you're not willing to trade up to get your quarterback.
Yeah,
So in that 2019 class, the Steelers gave up a first and third round pick and a second round pick in the following year to go get an off-ball linebacker. That kind of shows you the incompetence of Kevin Colbert in the last 5 years of his tenure there, because it was bad. You look at sometime we just have to break down his last 5 years. It was really, really, really rough. And so it's not hard to see why the Steelers got into the state that they were in. But yeah, absolutely. You got to, if you're willing to do it for a linebacker, you got to be willing to trade up for a quarterback. I just don't know how much capital the Steelers would be willing to give up. I don't know if they'd ever make that blockbuster move like some of what some of these other teams have done. If the situation calls for it, I hope that they would. But Shane, going back to those polarizing trade options like a Richardson, a Will Levis, a guy that's failed on another team but has traits, does that interest you at all? Or are you like, we need to be able to at least try to get into the playoffs?
I think for the right price, it's certainly something you should consider, because I think the problem with Arthur Smith's offense ultimately for me is that I think the upside is very low. However, the floor with the right quarterback and with the right receivers is relatively high as well, right? Like it's a system that I think a lot of quarterbacks can potentially have success with. And you kind of saw that with Fields, where like he wasn't as explosive of a player as he was in his Bears days, but the turnovers weren't a problem as much.
Mm-hmm.
The offense flowed better than it did at any point when he was with the Bears. Like this is a floor offense primarily. This is an offense that's meant to let's just get to 20-ish points, hope that the defense can keep the other team below that, but at least could consistently get us close to that 20-point margin typically with him. You could see a similar success rate with an Anthony Richardson or a Will Levis if those two can learn how to protect the football better. Richardson's case, the accuracy has been a problem, so you have to hone that in with him. But it's at least something you consider. But I think the problem is like for those teams, especially like Will Levis should probably be pretty cheap because I think he's certainly worn his welcome out. Just the most memeable quarterback I've seen in a long time. Let me just put it that way. And then Richardson, I think the problem with him is like I don't know how much they'd be willing to sell low on him, considering they don't really have any other options right now currently. That would be better. So if they're available, I'd be at least interested what the price would be. Probably for Richardson, you're looking at like a second round pick if they're actually done with him. Levis probably a day 3 pick. Realistically, would probably be enough to get him. But do you want to watch Will Levis play quarterback for the Steelers? I don't know if I do personally. So.
Man, every play would be you
never know.
You don't know.
You
don't know what you're getting with it. So
Pickens would have 1,400 yards and 20 touchdowns, but also probably 30 interceptions would be thrown his way too. So
if the choice is to Shayne what you're looking at is try to win 10 games and get into the playoffs, that's not the route you want to go. If you want to swing for the fences and say maybe this guy could be something, small chance he is, greater chance he's not, and let's get a high draft pick for 2026, they'll do that for you. So not the best options overall, but just throwing that out there. And going back to Rodgers real quick, does that come with a package deal, perhaps, with his buddy Davante Adams? Like maybe you would be able to get both. And let me ask you that, Shayne. If getting Rodgers meant that you also get Davante Adams, would you do that for Pittsburgh next year on a 2-year deal?
So the problem is I think from a football perspective, there's worse potential things you could do. I personally, though, am so far out on Rodgers that I can't do it. Like, part of the problem is not even him as a player, because like I think he's an average starter still, but I just can't stand the guy anymore, frankly. Like, and I know that's a personal problem, so like I probably shouldn't factor that in. But like, I just would every Pat McAfee appearance would just irritate me. Davante Adams is as great of a player as he is. I don't think he's worth the money he's currently getting paid anymore. Like, I just feel like it would be a disaster. I really do. I think it'd be a mess. So I'd probably rather not do that.
Yeah. I agree. I think that would be you're setting yourselves up for a train wreck there with probably not much upside.
The upside is not high enough for me to take the chance that he might just end up as a reality TV star in the middle of the season or something weird. I don't know. So I don't know. Yeah.
I got you. Shayne, let's talk NFL draft quarterback options here. And the pool is limited. It's really limited, especially when you consider Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders are going to be gone before Pittsburgh's pick. At least I believe they will be. Now, again, you can trade up potentially depending on how far one of those guys slides. Maybe it's Shedeur that starts sliding pick 6, 7, something like that. You got to get up to get him. Does that intrigue you at all? Like, are either of these quarterback prospects good enough to the point where you say, this is the year I'm going to gamble because I don't know what next year brings. We don't have a young option or much hope for this franchise until we get one. You can't really compete without one. So would you take a swing? Let's say it cost you 2 firsts and a future day 2 pick or whatever to move up and get whatever of those 2 quarterback falls.
I would not. No. Sanders has a late first, early second round grade for me, and Ward has an early day 2 grade for me. Ward is the guy that I would take the swing on if I had the opportunity because of the traits. I do think that he at least provides the upside potential that could make that trade worth it. However, I just don't view his overall game as solid enough to risk moving up to get at this point. Right. Like that's kind of what it comes down to. I think if you're a desperate team and need a quarterback, taking him as high as 1 is a huge risk, but I at least understand it. Like if the Titans do end up doing that, like I understand the thought process, but coming up to get him from down in the 20s would just be too expensive for me personally.
Yeah. And I totally understand that thought process as well. And I've heard it both ways. Like I had a conversation with somebody today where it's like, at one point you just need to swing, like just start swinging, throwing darts everywhere at quarterback and seeing which one sticks, because until you have one, nothing else really matters that much. It's what we've seen around the NFL. It's you have to have a quarterback to compete. Heck, you can look at the last 10 Super Bowls in the quarter in the winners. I mean, last 20 years, it's like Joe Flacco and Nick Foles are the only like not upper echelon quarterbacks to win Super Bowls. Everybody else is a top 7 quarterback in the league. And so that's what it seems like you need anymore to compete. So I would understand the thought process behind it. I would understand that in their minds, they would be thinking, yeah, if we don't have a quarterback, we don't have anything. So for that reason, I would get it, but I don't love this quarterback class. I think that it's pretty underwhelming.
It's just not the year to do it, in my opinion. Yeah, that's the problem. It'd be different.
Chances, yes.
It'd be different if this was last year, like because I didn't have particularly high grades on like McCarthy or Nix or Penix, but like Nix had a floor that was nice. McCarthy had athleticism and upside. Penix is an absolute flamethrower, as you saw at the end of the season. Like he at least can make every throw in the book. Like there would have been I would have understood them coming up to get one of those guys because they at least provide something that I think is worth it. And also they weren't going to be top 5 picks, right? They were end of top 10 picks. This year, I just don't think that either of the quarterbacks, like even if I had a pick high enough to take one of them, I'm still not super thrilled about it. That's just kind of where I'm at with them. Like if you want to take a shot on a Jalen Milroe, like we talked about, or some other guys we can talk about here a little bit on, day 2, day 3, like just to see if you can develop them or if they can come in and be a successful starter for you for a while to give you some time to find a higher upside quarterback, so be it. But I just don't think the top guys in this class are worth like mortgaging your future in any way for.
Yeah, and I've heard draft analysts even say Nix, Penix, McCarthy, any one of those guys would have been the top quarterback in this year's class.
You can definitely understand why all those guys.
Yeah. So where Steelers are sitting right now, I think the only option at pick 21, in my opinion, tell me if you think I'm wrong here, is Jalen Milroe. I think that he doesn't get back to the Steelers in the second round pick because there's too much to work with there in terms of the speed you're getting at the quarterback position. Now I'm going to have a second round grade on him probably, but grade wise is not always where they're going to be drafted. And we know quarterbacks go much higher than that. So I think that's the only one that they would consider taking in the first round right there. I did hear today that there is there's some first round buzz for Will Howard. And that one would make me a little bit sick, I think, just based on what I've watched right now. And it's just because I remember everything that I've seen, I just have a hard time getting behind that arm working out in the NFL. I think it's very, very average to below average at best. And I'm not convinced that that's the total traits package. Size-wise, yes, layering throws. He's got that pedigree, but the arm would be hard for me to get behind.
Yeah, I have a feeling once I watch Howard, I don't think he climbs any higher than the 4th quarterback for me in the class. Like I could see him getting up to that point. But for me, like if you don't take Milroe at 21, like you said, I don't think he makes it back to their pick in the second round. You could move up in the second round if he doesn't make it through the first round. If he makes it through the first round, I'd be much more willing to take him high up in the second instead of the first. Now, there's the idea of like maybe you want to have the 5th-year option in case he works out, but at that point, like I don't really know if it matters that much at this point. Like if he's great, you're going to end up paying him a ton of money anyway. It doesn't really matter. But so he's definitely the guy that I'd be targeting on day 2. If you can't get him, I mean, I don't have another day 2 grade currently with any of the quarterbacks. Like I'm probably going to drop this guy down just because he didn't impress me in the playoff run. But Riley Leonard I liked because the athletic traits is a bigger quarterback, but I don't think he has the arm talent to really probably be a starter ever. Carson Beck doesn't interest me, and he went back anyway, so you don't have to worry about him. Kyle McCord I think is like a good, like if you want somebody who is going to take more chances with the football, be more aggressive as a passer, he'd be an interesting find. But again, I still think he's a day 3 type of talent, though. I don't think he has the arm talent to really make good on those big time throws to the next level. Just most of these other guys, I just think they profile as backups long term.
Yeah, I agree with you. From all the quarterbacks that I've watched so far, the only ones that I would really probably spend a pick on outside of those top 3 guys, Milroe being the 3rd, would be Will Howard and Jackson Dart. Like those are only the 2 that I've
Dart's a guy
that I kind of like.
It's tough for me because like I have him at QB9, but it's mostly just because I don't trust the offense he runs and I don't trust his ability under pressure and other things. Like if you want to take a flyer at him, I think he makes the most sense because of the traits, obviously. But even then, I don't think his arm is anything special or anything like that. I think it's good. In this class, it's
Yeah,
probably one of the 5 best arms, but it's just, yeah, he's one that I struggle with, honestly. So
I agree. And I understand why. That's just a small sample to none, basically, of quarterbacks like that working out. He's hardly under pressure. Some things to get excited about. 21 years old. I think he
yeah,
checked a lot of the boxes that you're looking for. Good production,
good
highest
athlete.
graded quarterback in the country. His stable
Yeah,
metrics are all really good. So but really, I mean, it's such a thin quarterback class that there's only like a couple guys outside of the first round that I would even spend a pick on this year. I
yeah,
think you're kind of burning your pick. When you look at backups around the league, you're not usually getting guys in the mid rounds to be your backup quarterback. A lot of times those are your developmental scout team quarterback. Backups can be found everywhere. And want a backup quarterback, you can go get one in free agency. I think that's a better option. Save your draft pick. But
yeah,
if you think there's a chance they could develop into a starter, that's when you spend mid-round
yeah,
draft capital on a quarterback, in my opinion. So those are the draft options. Now, what is the only way to find lasting success at the quarterback, Shayne? In my opinion, it's the only way the Steelers have found it. It's the only way that nearly all these teams have found it. There are exceptions to that. Obviously, the Rams traded for Matt Stafford. They go and win a Super Bowl shortly after that. But more often than not, and Tom Brady goes to the Bucs, they win a Super Bowl. More often than not, Shayne, you need to draft a franchise guy. And once you get one, you're never letting him go unless it's late in his career, like a Peyton Manning in a perfect situation falls in your lap, like you get the top pick in Andrew Luck. And if you don't get that, you're going to keep him essentially his whole career, at least until you believe that he's washed up at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the only way to do it. And for the Steelers specifically, like, they know this. They've seen it with Bradshaw, played his whole career in Pittsburgh, Hall of Fame career. Ben Roethlisberger played his whole career in Pittsburgh, Hall of Fame career. Those are 2 of the 3 first-round quarterbacks they've taken in the entire Super Bowl era, Shayne, and 2 of them are Hall of Famers. And so you have to go that route again. Streaming quarterbacks that are 37, 42 years old, like Aaron Rodgers, 36, Kirk Cousins, whatever, that's just not going to do it. It's going to keep you competitive, at least in the regular season, year to year. I don't even know if you can compete in the playoffs with any streaming option, though. And so I think that's the way you got to get back on top again.
Yeah, I mean, if we're just talking about the lasting success, especially, like, sure, in the next couple years, could a veteran quarterback that is clearly Super Bowl caliber come free because the team is willing to move on or they're older or whatever, like we've seen with Brady and Manning and guys like that, Stafford? Sure, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But if that doesn't happen, like, that's still only minor success for a limited time. If that were to happen, you need to find somebody in the draft who you can trust to be the franchise quarterback. And obviously, they tried that with Kenny Pickett. Didn't go so well, to say the least. And this class, I just don't think is the year to do it either. So I think you look at 2026 and beyond. I think the 2026 class, I'm hoping, will have more guys that are actually in the running to be franchise quarterbacks. Have not even remotely started to worry about who's going to be in that class yet. Obviously there's the Drew Allers, the world, the Arch Mannings potentially, stuff like that. But unless they can find somebody in that class or the class after, like, we're probably looking at several years of continued mediocre quarterback play.
Yeah, and then it's hard because it's like, all right, at what point do you take a stab? Do you go 2-3 years before you do it, and you're going to stream that whole time? It's like, the problem with that, Shayne, too, with that philosophy, is you never have that continuity on offense. If you're constantly going, I'm going to jump from Russell Wilson to Justin Fields to whoever the next guy is.
Yeah,
you're just not getting continuity on offense, and you're not building. You should be building around a franchise quarterback, not the other way around. And obviously, you still want to draft good pieces, whatever you do, but you're just you don't have the continuity. And how do you expect to get better if you're just swapping out quarterbacks every year? Like, it's a fatal philosophy in my mind in terms of bringing another championship to this team. That's my thought process on it. If you guys have a different thought on what the Steelers should do, or of all the options we talked about, which one do you think is best? Drop it down in the chat. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Is it Wilson, Justin Fields, going with the in-house option? Is it a free agent quarterback like Rodgers and Cousins soon will be, Sam Darnold, excuse me? Is it a trade option? Is it the draft option? Where do you think they should go next year? Because lots of schools of thought there. I think that nothing's going to really go right until you get that franchise guy, but easier said than done. This probably isn't the year to do it, unfortunately. So we're going to have to probably wait at least another year, more likely than not. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shayne. Biggest roster cuts the Steelers could make in 2025. Some of these are really, really simple. Others we got to think about a little bit more. But there are several here that are just, easy cap savings, no-brainer decisions. So we'll start with the easiest ones on the list. Top of the list, decision has never been easier. Preston Smith.
Yeah.
His contract situation is unbearably bad. He's got a base salary of $12 million. The Steelers could save $13.4 million without losing a dime on his contract, and that's what you're going to do. The guy didn't even earn a helmet late in the season or in the playoffs. So, should he have? Yes, he absolutely should have been playing over Jeremiah Moon. Questionable decision, Mike Tomlin, Terrell Austin, very questionable. But no, he's not coming back at that salary.
No, he's not coming back. So this is the easy one. This is the clear one. It saves a ton of money. They already have a good amount of cap space, but saving a ton more by making this move. I thought Preston Smith played pretty well for them ultimately for what they got. Again, why you didn't have him in the playoff game, not that it would have mattered, but doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but whatever. Unfortunately for him and for the team, they just didn't really work out at the end of the season, and this was never going to be a contract that was on the books anyway. If he wants to come back on a smaller deal, I'm down with that. If he doesn't, then so be it. But this is an easy cut.
Yeah, Shayne, it still burns me up thinking that Terrell Austin went with Cam Sutton and Jeremiah Moon over Corey Trice and Preston Smith to earn a helmet in the playoff game there against the Ravens. I just don't know what they're doing sometimes. We went back and looked at that Ravens game. We dissected it last week. How big of a front that they played against the Steelers, and that was their plan, was to deploy nickel and get some of their weakest guys out on the field. Is what it is. Next cut, Shayne, Larry Ogunjobi. This one is very easy for me. Maybe the organization would have to think about it a little bit more than I would, but this is a very easy decision because Ogunjobi has been incredibly underwhelming. After his first year, kind of experimental year with the team in 2022, the Steelers signed him to a 3-year extension in 2023, but for $9.58 million per season. I was not a fan of that. You overpay because interior defenders are a premium. There weren't many of them out there. But Ogunjobi's been super underwhelming. The guy cannot hold up against the run. He's getting older at this point. To me, he's like, I think he really should be just a situational interior rusher. And even then, he's just not highly effective. And so to save $7 million, I will gladly take that money and throw it back into another interior defender.
Yeah, just at this point, you can just do better for that amount of money, honestly, whether it's free agency, whether it ends up being in the draft. He doesn't have the juice as a pass rusher he did earlier on in his career. He hasn't been able to do that as well. And he's never been a run defender. That was really anything to write home about. So at this point, he just doesn't bring enough value to play heavy snaps. So you let him go and, try to upgrade from there.
Now, then the question becomes, all right, if you're getting rid of Ogunjobi, what are you going to do next? Yeah, I get that.
There's somebody I have in mind, but he might be too expensive. But I do have somebody in mind here. But
Okay. Yeah. Well, we can. You want to talk about it now, or you want to say?
I'll throw the name out. We'll talk about free agents and stuff like that. This team can go after. Milton Williams of the Eagles is somebody I'm highly interested in.
Yeah.
As an interior rusher type that you could play next to Cam and Benton and stuff like that. So, but he might get kind of a surprisingly large amount of money coming from the Eagles front. But that's someone I'd be interested in. In general, I think you could just do better, and with the $7 million that you'd be saving. So,
yeah, I get that. I see people floated Javon Hargrave's name out there.
Maybe
option wouldn't be as expensive at this stage in his career, 32 years old. But you got to do obviously something to replace that. I just think he'd be pretty easy to replace, honestly.
Yeah,
I don't think he's offered hardly anything to the team.
Not since that.
So I would no, and with the contract being what it is, I would gladly turn the page on that deal. The next one would be Cole Holcomb. Now, a lot of people say Steelers aren't hanging on to Cole Holcomb for an entire year just to cut him. But then I would say, what are you going to do with him? Let's assume that Holcomb is back. He's healthy. He's ready to go. is your third linebacker at this point, fourth linebacker. I mean, if Steelers bring Landon Roberts back on a short-term deal,
Might be
maybe
your fourth.
Holcomb goes back to being your fourth linebacker again. Now,
Yeah.
there's another linebacker on here that we could discuss, Shayne, who we can say maybe is not deserving of the money that he's getting, and that's Patrick Queen.
Yeah.
And I would debate people on that, and I would say, yeah, you could save darn near $10 million if you cut Patrick Queen. You're still losing $7 million in dead money, but I don't think Patrick Queen is worth the contract. Now, the way the Steelers structured his deal, Patrick Queen's cap number goes up to $17.7 million this year. That's a lot of money for a wildly inconsistent off-ball linebacker. Does he make your team better and faster? Yeah, I think he does. But the gap savings, the difference, like if I knew that Holcomb was at full health, I would have a discussion, Shayne, about maybe keeping Holcomb over Patrick Queen, just because I don't think the Steelers are getting their money's worth out of this player. And like I said, you can save $10 million. Can you put that back into another linebacker potentially? I wasn't super impressed with Queen. Hopefully he gets better, but again, he's 5 years going on year 6 into his NFL career. I don't know how much better. I think that he's the player that he's going to be at this point. What would you do with either one of those guys?
This is the fun conversation, because if you told me Holcomb was going to come back and be the same player he was before his injury, I would 110% turn the Queen card and say, get him out of here. I just would.
Yeah.
Didn't like the contract from the get-go. I don't think he did enough this year to earn that contract. I don't think he's going to be a top linebacker for us at any point. And I think Peyton Wilson is prepared to take over that run and chase, like speed threat linebacker role full time. I think he's good enough to do that. So you bring in Holcomb, you keep him on the team to be that more field general type, the guy that's going to get everyone lined up, that's going to be a solid tackler, good in zone coverage, all that good stuff. But we just don't know that. That's kind of the problem. Like, if he's not going to be the same player he was, or at least you don't think he can be, then you probably just keep Queen and deal with it and hope that he can have a better second season and let Holcomb go. So that's ultimately what it comes down to for me. I would lean cutting Holcomb because I just don't believe he's going to be the same player based on what we've seen. So that's what it comes down to for me, is just the health factor with him.
Yeah, that's a pretty devastating knee injury. Obviously, it happened in week 8 of last year, I believe. And the fact that he wasn't even ready to play at all this season kind of showed you where he was at. Now, he was practicing with the team late in the season, so that's a good sign.
That's a good sign.
I just don't know that the contract is just too big to carry into next season, though, if you don't have a plan for him.
Yeah, if he's not going to be the starting linebacker next to a combination of Peyton Wilson and Landon Roberts, it's probably not worth keeping him around, especially if you just don't know if he's going to be the same player.
Yep, I agree. Shayne, the next name on the list is Cordarrelle Patterson. Very underwhelming this year. And I mean, expectations probably should have been low to begin with. You're talking about a 33-year-old wide receiver turned running back late in his career. Amazing kick returner throughout his career, but it certainly wasn't with the Steelers. I mean, he offered nothing as a kick returner in this new rule, in this new situation. That would be a very easy decision for me. Cut him, save the $2.8 million. I mean, that money can go right back into Jaylen Warren's tenure, basically, and we'll say we're going to get a whole new running back room in there, minus maybe Jaylen Warren.
Yeah, that's what I would do too. Now, do I expect this to happen? I don't, because Arthur Smith loves Cordarrelle Patterson probably more than anyone else on the planet does. So to me, I think he stays for that reason. However, I certainly would make this cut because, again, I think the only running back that I would bring back from this room would be Warren, because I think he, at least if he's healthy, is a scheme fit for what we're trying to do. Najee obviously had a season that is the same season he always has, which I commend him for, honestly, considering he wasn't a good fit for the scheme. But he just doesn't provide upside. He doesn't provide a good scheme fit for the team. So I expect him to be gone. So Warren comes back, in my opinion, and everyone else can go out the door, and we can try to reset the running back room.
Yeah, to me, Shayne, it's just, I mean, it's not a significant cap savings, but I thoroughly believe that whatever guy you bring in here for your third running back at a few $100,000 is going to do everything that Cordarrelle Patterson did. And the return game was just non-existent at all. Like it wasn't there. And so that's the sole reason you brought him in, and it didn't really amount to anything. And so that would be my holdup for even giving him another chance. I was trying to see if I could find the return stats here. Let's see. Kick returns. Yeah. 11 kick returns this year for the Steelers for 21 yards. return. I mean, it's
bad. It's not great.
it's not. Yeah, it's just it was
He doesn't have the juice
a
anymore.
33-yard long, 33-yard long.
He's also in his almost mid-30s at this point. Like, let's be real.
Yeah.
Like, it's nothing against Cordell Patterson. Like, one of the greatest return men of all time, had a great end of his career as a running back, wide receiver hybrid. Nothing against him, but he's just not the same player anymore. It's fine. Like, he just doesn't have the same juice he used to have. It's what it is. So
it happens, and he outlasted most guys at his position. That's probably because he didn't carry the load early on. He was wide receiver, obviously, coming into the league. But yeah, if you make it to this stage in your career, it's been a successful career, and it certainly has been for this Hall of Fame resume as a return man. Just certainly did not show that for the Steelers. He's got nothing left in the tank, really, in my opinion. Next name on the list, be a real easy one for me. Dean Lowry wasn't even always getting a helmet down the stretch for the Steelers. $2.5 million cap savings. I think you could very much just swap him out with Logan Lee next year, whatever you want to do, and pay Lee a few $100,000. Get rid of Dean Lowry. I think that one's a pretty easy choice, in my opinion. Well, what is the point of you go out and get this depth, Shayne, but the depth doesn't play? And when the depth plays, it's horrendous. And so, yeah, I've got no interest in bringing him back on that.
Yeah, this entire interior defensive line group, and like whether you're talking about the 3-4 end types or the true interior type, like whatever you want to talk about, they just need to reset this whole room. Like, it just needs to be completely different, in my opinion. And there's another guy we'll talk about here to finish things off in a second, but Lowry falls into that category. 1 sack, had a couple pressures, but like was completely useless against the run. Just wasn't the player that I think they're hoping you'd have as depth. And again, they just don't use their depth enough, frankly, to pay for it this way. Like, you just should save money if you're not going to use it.
Yep, 100%. And the last name I have on the list, Shayne, of the biggest roster cut Steelers could make is Montravius Adams. The Steelers love this guy.
They do.
For whatever reason. I think that he's playing out of position. He's not a nose tackle. He doesn't have that physical makeup. He doesn't have the run stopping ability. So that's a problem already right there. Secondly, I just think that most of the time he's either getting washed out of play or he's been non-existent. It's a cheap depth option, but I just think you can do better. Like, I think this D-line, it's really showing these last couple of years, it needs an overhaul. Like, outside of Cam and Benton, you could wipe out the rest of the group and bring in all new guys, and you're probably better off for it just because the depth is not good. And it's showing, the evidence is showing itself on the field in recent years. He's dealt with injury stuff, and the play has been very underwhelming. So whatever, it's $2.25 million, but I just think that these bottom 3-4 guys on the roster, I want to wipe them all out and try to get more stout guys in there, at least guys that can defend the run a little bit better, because the Steelers really struggle in that regard.
Yeah, and I think this chat from our Barley here about Benton to end and get a real nose tackle, 100%. Like, we've been on this train for a while.
Tackle.
No, he's not. He shouldn't be. I understand, like, he's technically big enough to be one. This guy's a pass rusher. Like, let's be real about it. He's not this, like, he's not going to 2-gap. He's not going to do all this stuff as a nose tackle and actually be successful with it. And again, like, it is what it is with the Steelers front. Like, we know how explosive they are. They gotta find somebody to play some run defense, man. Like, Cam can't keep doing this by himself. As great as he is, you can't keep asking the 35, 36-year-old guy to be the point of attack against the run and expect that to be successful all the time. Like, he needs someone else in there to help him. So definitely agree with that. And then this was one that I just thought was interesting. Javonte Williams fixed the mistake. I don't think Williams is really any good anymore. I don't think he's been good since his rookie season. And a lot of that is, I think, injuries and just stuff like that. But he's an interesting player, but I'm not really on that. Just throwing that one out there. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest Javonte Williams fan. I think that he kind of is what he is type of guy at this point, and I don't think that he's been great. And so that one would be, I just don't have a lot of interest there. Yeah. I think, honestly, the way to go with the running backs, Shayne, and that's a whole nother podcast, but
yeah, we'll talk about it at some point.
You know how I feel about the position in general. You kind of use and abuse them, throw them back on the pile, and you get another one. And unfortunately, the guys that you get in free agency, they've already have tread off the tires. They've already been banged up. They've already had significant injuries. I mean, you look at Najee, a guy that's had 1,000 yards, and you go back 1,000 carries with Pittsburgh, essentially 1,700 carries since college. He's going to be worn down. And I don't even care if he hasn't missed games because of injury. On his next contract, I can't imagine him being better than he was on his first, and just because of the wear and tear that running backs come with. And so my philosophy there in a nutshell is draft a running back on day 2 every 4 or 5 years. You run them till the wheels fall off, and you draft another one. And so that's probably the best approach in terms of getting the most bang for your buck there.
Yeah, if you were going to go after a free agent running back, I'm just throwing this out there since we're talking about a little bit, because there's a chance that he may not be back, even though I would do it if I was them. Jordan Mason of the 49ers would be a great fit because he already understands his own running scheme. He is younger and also hasn't had many carries. Like, that's the type of free agent running back you sign if you're going to sign a free agent running back. A guy who's not going to command a ton of money, who has not had too many carries and is still young enough to provide upside. Like, that's the type of free agent running back you sign. Not a guy that, unfortunately, as much as I love Javonte Williams, he's just not the player that came out of North Carolina. He just isn't that player anymore.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Those are all the names that I had, Shayne, in terms of the big roster cuts Steelers could make. Do you have any other names you want to throw out there?
I definitely think they need to restructure Minka's deal, so not a cut. That's
the name I was going to mention. And a
Yeah,
lot of people have said cut, but yeah, go on, Shayne.
Yeah, I don't think that it's a cut situation. One, as much as he was disappointing this year, I don't think they want from him. But more importantly, I think they just need to move. So.
Yeah, and you're breaking up on us a little bit there, but let me just, in Minka's contract, he does have a cap number of $22.355 million. That's obnoxiously large for the player that he is at this stage. I'm not saying that Minka himself has gotten worse, but collectively with the scheme, I mean, the guy has 1 interception since 2022. It's not been worth that money. Quite clearly, it really hasn't. But you also would take $13.71 million in dead cap hit if you were to cut him this year. One potential option, not going to happen, just throwing it out there. If the Steelers were to make him a post June 1st cut, they would save $15.5 million. That's a significant chunk of change, but the free agent pool is going to be pretty dry by that point. I think that you need to restructure. I think that they'll end up keeping him at least 1 more year, and this will be kind of that year where they'll decide what to do with him after this, because it's not worth the contract, but I just don't think you have a lot of options right now. Cutting him, you would eat more in dead money than you would in cap gain in cap savings. And so I just don't think the Steelers are going to view that as an option. And knowing them in Minka's history as a 3-time All-Pro player, that's just not on the table for them.
No, that's why I mentioned restructure. I think that's what will end up happening. They should do that, I think, a little bit, just to make that contract a little bit more palatable for this year and gives them more flexibility. Because if this team is going to make a playoff push in 2025, whoever the quarterback is, they have to address a lot of positions and strengthen the roster, and you have to spend some amount of money to do that. So.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Shayne, let's move on. And we're going to give our championship round and Super Bowl predictions here. And then we'll check on this and see what we got right. Before we sign off on today's show, we've got Bills at the Chiefs this weekend. Shayne, is that the matchup that you were hoping to see, these two teams in the AFC? Obviously, we won the Steelers in there, but
yeah, I mean, this is what I expected ultimately. I did think the Ravens had a good shot to beat the Bills last week, but I obviously that didn't work out for them. So this is it feels right, I will say. Like, this feels like what probably should happen based on the trajectory of these two teams. We've seen this matchup already. The Bills did have a huge win, one of the only 2 losses the Chiefs have had this year. But if I'm being honest with myself, if I were to pick against Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, I think I'd have to be admitted to the hospital. So I'm not going to do that until proven otherwise. I do think Josh Allen's playing at a level this year that gives him the opportunity to make this upset happen. But I worry that McDermott is not going to unleash him the way that he should be unleashed against this Chiefs defense to give them a chance. You saw the way they kind of game plan against the Ravens, where they're very safe, conservative. I don't think they can get away with that against this Chiefs defense. I think that they have to allow Josh Allen to be a superhuman, and he's already done it to this team before in the past. Like, it's not like he can't do it, but I do wonder if McDermott's going to ask Brady to kind of chill out a little bit on offense and maybe give the Chiefs an opening to win here.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting. The Bills, for what it's worth, they are 1.5-point road underdogs. So assuming this was on a neutral playing field, I mean, this is close to a pick'em type game for these teams here. I'm going to go with the Bills. I'm going to be that.
I want it to happen. I want
I
it to happen, but I can't do it in good conscience.
I understand what you're saying, and then I'll kick myself next week when we talk about this again and say, why didn't I pick the Chiefs? They've been here and they've done it 3 of the last 4 years.
Yeah.
They're just there all the time. They're there all the time.
Yeah.
They get some ref assistance. I think everybody probably knows that at this point with some of the things that go on there. But Josh Allen is a bona fide MVP caliber quarterback this year, and Mahomes has not played that way. He is that guy,
just not,
but he's not played that way. And I think that could make the difference in this game. So I will say Bills narrowly over Chiefs, and it might take one of those game-winning drives with like 50 seconds left to make that happen. But I'm going to be optimistic here for all you Chiefs haters out there, and I'm going to say Bills take this one on the road, and they get back to the Super Bowl looking for their first. Shayne, over in the NFC, Commanders at the Eagles in the NFC Championship. The Eagles are 6-point favorites in this game. Any chance of an upset here?
I do think there's a chance for sure. I think what Jayden Daniels is doing right now is incredible. We've seen him have success against this Eagles team this year, especially the game that unfortunately Kenny Pickett had to play most of. So that probably helps them a little bit. But I do think he can have success against this defense. I think that he's shown the ability to step up in the fourth quarter of games. So if they keep it close, especially, I think that this could be a very good game. However, I just worry that the Commanders' defense isn't going to have an answer for Saquon Barkley. I just don't think right now that any team really does, especially the teams that are left, maybe the Chiefs if they play them in the Super Bowl. But I just feel like unless Hurts has a back-breaking turnover or two, or he can't go at all, or he's just banged up like really badly where they can't do anything in the air, I do think the Eagles will come away with this one.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Eagles as well. I don't want to. I'd like to see that upset. Man, if we had like a Commanders Bills,
that's the dream.
Super Bowl. It's
the dream
it's this kind of win-win scenario. Both of those teams, you kind of root for them off and on. I know obviously Steelers play the Bills often enough where you don't.
Right.
But I think we can get behind either one of those teams. We don't want to see is this rematch of a Super Bowl.
Eagles Chiefs part 2 that is way worse than the last one.
Yes, it'll be worse and less entertaining. You're not going to get a 38-35
I don't think so. No,
like we did last time. I do think that the Eagles win this one, though, too. I think that their roster is just too good, too strong, and the running game is too good with Saquon there. That it's going to get the job done. Now, we did just see the Commanders beat an equally talented Lions team last week because Jayden was better than the Lions roster. Can he do it twice in a row and be better than the Eagles roster? Maybe. I don't know. I think it's on the table at least. He is a young quarterback, though, who's treading new territory. I think there was a stat. I'm trying to remember what it was, but I think of quarterbacks that have gone this far into the postseason during their rookie year, it was normally accompanied with like a top 4 defense.
Yeah, worst defense by a mile that's made it this far. The rookie
18th ranked defense, I think, overall. And so, so it's remarkable that he's gone this far and he's played this well. So
something to keep in mind real quick. I wanted to mention this because I would be remiss if I don't. Another reason I'm a little bit worried about the Commanders is that their top offensive lineman, Sam Cosmi, is out for the playoffs now. That's something that hurts a lot. I think especially Jalen Carter, the way he's played, the way he demolished the Rams in that game, like that is something to monitor for sure in this game if they have trouble up front.
Absolutely. And they're already shorthanded in terms of talent when you get stacked up against a team like the Eagles that are just so well-rounded and don't have those holes anywhere.
Deep as any team in the league.
So Shayne, you've got an Eagles Chiefs Super Bowl. I have an Eagles Bills Super Bowl. And who do you think will make our real early predictions here? Who comes out on top between the Eagles and the Chiefs in this Super Bowl?
I do think that if the Eagles and Chiefs played, I do think the Chiefs will win again against them. I think that the passing game for the Eagles will become more important because as great as Barkley is, as great as their run blocking is, I think the Chiefs defense just figures out a way to take away your strengths in the playoffs. And if they can do that, I don't know if Hurts is ready to kind of put on the cap again and put on that put on the cape, I should say, like he did in that first Super Bowl, where outside of the big fumble that he had, he was really spectacular. I just don't think he's capable of doing that at this moment in time for a multitude of reasons. And I think the Chiefs will kind of bleed them out basically and eventually kind of take the win at the end.
All right, fair enough. I'm sure that's what everybody is hoping.
Yeah, sure, right? Yeah.
4 Super Bowls in 5-year span.
Why not?
I've got Eagles and Bills in the Super Bowl, and as much as I'd like to see Josh Allen just go like full superhero mode and overcome the better roster, I think that the Eagles would win out just the sheer talent when you compare it to the Bills roster, and I would have the Eagles winning the Super Bowl over the Bills. We'll check back on these predictions in just a few weeks here and see how we did. And next week at this time, we'll be down to just 2 teams left in the race heading to the Super Bowl. And so thank you for joining us on today's show. Please be sure to leave us a like and a comment down here.
Yes,
help us get seen. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, please tell others about it as well. We go live on this show every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Also check out Josh Yorish's show live at Mondays at 1:30 p.m. as well. Thank you for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on X at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on X at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain Steelers podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.